Have you gamers ever heard of the Darius series? This is a mostly Japan-only series of side-scrolling shoot-'em-up games. While I say mostly, there have been very few Darius series that have come to the West, but there have been a few. Just this past couple weeks, a new game for the PlayStation Vita that's also been released on the PlayStation 4 in the Darius series has come west. So, here is my official review of Darius Burst Chronicle Saviours. Story's always been pretty light in the Darius series, but there is a little sci-fi story thrown into the mix. Throughout the series, and the same in Chronicle Saviours, you play the role of a ship pilot in what's called the hyperspace network that's under attack by alien forces that attack with small ships as well as giant fish-like battleships. All in all, the story is pretty light. You only see little tidbits of story right before you go into a mission, but it's there so you know what you're doing. Darius Burst Chronicle Saviours is a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up game. As you play through each game mode, you'll be traveling through 2D environments, fighting off enemy ships as well as giant battleships. But there's more to this game than just the gameplay. This is actually two games built in one. If Sword Art Online fans remember how Sword Art Online Hollow Fragment had a remade version of Infinity Moment as well as the new Hollow Fragment section, this is very similar to how this game runs. There are two game modes in Chronicle Saviours. There is AC mode and CS mode. AC mode is the entire PSP game, Darius Burst Another Chronicle, that never made it west. And then you have Chronicle Savior mode, that is the new game. Another Chronicle mode has 4 game modes, but one of the game modes is not playable. You have Original mode, where you go through a gauntlet of 3 zones full of enemies leading up to a boss fight in a rid of a route tree. It feels kind of like an arcade mode. Then you have Chronicle mode, which arranges the game into areas and missions instead of just a straight gauntlet. Then Original EX mode is just like Original, but it has some extra areas and is quite a bit harder. The last mode, which is not available, is Event mode. Event mode was the original game's online mission mode. Then you get to Chronicle Savior mode. This is a bit more expansive. In Chronicle Savior mode, there are no difficulty options like there are in AC mode, and you go through a mission tree. Basically, you have a mission set on a specific date in the storyline, you do the mission, and then it unlocks and branches out into more missions you can do, both required for progression and optional missions. In CS mode, you have the regular missions like in AC mode, where you're going through a zone and leading up to a boss fight, but you also have 2 other types of mode. There's a defense mode, where you're defending a planet from enemy invaders, where you can't let a single enemy go past, and you got scramble missions, which are basically like the original missions but on a timer that makes things a little more intense. As you complete missions in CS mode, you are earned points based on the score you get in each mission. Points can be added up and used to purchase new ships, as well as purchase upgrades for your ships. This is the main progression point that's going to make things a lot easier, because CS mode gets pretty hard pretty quickly. I wasn't 3 or 4 stages into the game before I started having problems and started failing missions. When you're in actual gameplay, you're in a 2D environment, though it does have 3D visuals, and the camera is moving on its own, kind of like some older Mario games do. So you can't just leisurely go through at a slow pace, you go at the pace that the game tells you you're going to go. As you go through the stage, you will be avoiding obstacles like space stations, asteroids, and other science fiction elements, while gunning down hordes of enemy ships that are coming your way. You have 2 main weapons you can use to fight these enemy ships. You have your main laser cannons, and then you have your burst cannons. Burst cannons are tied to a burst gauge. As you defeat enemy hordes, your burst gauge will fill up. Once it's filled up, you can tap the X or L button to unleash your burst cannon, which is a large, powerful laser cannon. There are a few different ways you can do this too. By holding X, you can do a large laser cannon coming out of the front of your ship, but if you tap L, it'll leave the laser cannon there so you can move out of the way while it's still firing on enemies. There are a few other things you can do. You can see in the game's manual, like using your burst as a counterattack when an enemy boss uses theirs. The other element in gameplay are orbs that enemies drop. Some enemies are color-coded and will drop certain orbs. Orbs can increase the amount of health you have before you'll lose a life and lose a ship, but the most important orb, at least in my opinion, are the red orbs that enhance your attacks. This can give you entirely new weapons, give you more sprays of bullets in your current weapons. Basically, all in all, it's a weapon upgrade that's going to help you. Before I wrap up the gameplay section, there are a few things I want to say about the gameplay. The first is the fact that the PlayStation Vita and PlayStation TV version of this game does not have any sort of multiplayer in it. The PlayStation 4 has multiplayer, albeit it's quite limited, but the Vita had multiplayer completely taken out. The other is the boss fights. There are over 40 different bosses in the game, but as you're going through CS mode, you're gonna see a lot of repeated boss fights before you see the new boss fights. Now, it's hard to gauge the time frame on this game. In reality, you can switch cabinets that you're assigned to in the game, and you can literally have hundreds upon hundreds of stages you can go through. But people who don't want to do absolute 100% may not be spending all that much time to do everything there is to do. CS mode is pretty lengthy. One go through CS mode, I'd say, with the learning curve and with gaining points to buy ships, would take several hours. As far as the presentation's concerned, most of it is good, but I do have one little thing to nitpick. AC mode has a default resolution and is locked to a default resolution. So it is in a widescreen format, so there are pretty big borders above and below the game. You can get used to this, but because of this default resolution, whether you're playing on the Vita or the PlayStation TV, all of the text when you're in this mode is very small and very hard to read. Everything else about the performance is great. The visuals look really nice and colorful, and the frame rate is really nice and steady. Darius Burst Chronicle Saviours is fun, mindless, and full of giant fish robot ships for you to take down. There are a few things holding it back, like the lack of multiplayer, repetitive bosses before new bosses show up, and the default resolution in another Chronicle mode. If these don't bother you, then you're in for a very fun and challenging 2D shoot-'em-up game. Reviews to Go rates Darius Burst Chronicle Saviours a 7 out of 10. If you'd like to comment on this, feel free to below, or head to my site at reviewstogo.com.